Basically, yes, so we're in Orchot Tzaddikim, and we're relatively towards the beginning of the book, and we're going through different types of attributes. The one that we're doing now is love, and he's talking about different types of love, or different types of things that people have love for, in either a negative or positive way. The types of things that he's talking about is love of food, love of this world, love of life, love of children, love of spouse, love of money, love of honor, and all the different negative ways that this type of love can be expressed. Right now is in the section which is going more through the positive manifestation of these different forms of loves, and more specifically, in this case, he's talking about love of life, where love of life, just for life's sake, is not a good thing. A person who's only interested in maintaining life to have more life, but a life without any content of Torah, is never going to expend effort or any sacrifice for anything that's good or worthwhile. Rather, the person is only going to be interested in enjoying things in life, or enjoying things that are going to prolong a person's life. Rather, which is not good. Rather, a person should be thinking about eating and drinking in order to sustain his life, in order to have a good, long life of opportunities to learn Torah and to do the mitzvot. And for that reason, he's going to be eating foods which, in qualitatively and quantitatively, are going to be healthy for him. If it's tasty but unhealthy, he'll avoid them. If it is healthy and untasty, he will partake of them. Even if it's healthy, he'll partake of a moderate amount, but not an unhealthy amount, and so forth and so on. These are the types of things that he was talking about, right? So I think because of the end of time, we had to break in the middle of Mem Tes. A person should not love the world for the purpose of eating and drinking and deriving benefit from it. And so too was taught by one of the wise men who said, I'll eat in order to live. As opposed to the foolish person who says, I'll live in order to eat. I live to eat. No, I eat to live. Regarding such a person who is eating in order to live, not living in order to eat, Tzaddik Orchot l'soiva nafsho. A tzaddik eats till his nefesh, his physical needs, are satiated. Uvetin reshoim techsar. But the bellies of the wicked will always be lacking. Which means, no matter what they have, they always want more. Yeah, they're gluttonous. And I mentioned not too long ago, I don't know if everybody who's here now was there then, but it might be worth mentioning, at least in brief, that my father-in-law of blessed memory would always take issue when he heard people, saying what in English would be bon appetit, which is really French, but in Hebrew translated into lasova, a bita'avon. If people say bita'avon, that's kind of like the Hebrew translation of bon appetit. You eat with an appetite. So he took issue with that. He said that's not how Jews eat. Jews do not eat with ta'avon, with taiva. We don't eat for taiva. Rather, he said, a person, if you're going to say anything, you should say a more appropriate kind of benediction would be lasova. May your food be satiating, like it says in the pasuk, tzaddik ochel l'soiva nasho. Right, we're supposed to eat not the taiva, but like a tzaddik, which is the svia. So therefore, he would say, whether you eat a lot or little, it should be satiating, fulfilling that what you need, and not that which you desire. And I think he was right on that. Inappropriate. B'ta'avon. L'sova. And this way, you're also quoting a pasuk. Right? Tzaddik, that's what he says here. Tzaddik ochel l'sova. L'sova nafsho. A tzaddik eats in order to satiate his nefesh. A nefesh being the physical, kind of the more physical level of soul associated with our physiological needs. And therefore, the tzaddik ochel l'sova nafsho. The tzaddik eats according to what his physical body needs, but no more than that. Right? If you're eating bread and butter, so really all you need is the bread. You don't need the butter. the butter is really harmful, and it's there only because
That's the flavor, no?
yeah, it's like a flavor item. So, in truth, a person could try and do away without the butter. I'd like to have the butter, but really, what's the point? I don't need it. It has no nutritional value, and it could be harmful. So, it's really the bread that I need. I need the carbs to get me through the day. So I have a piece of bread without the butter. Maybe a little olive oil. Oils, of course, are good. A person has to have some oil in his diet. But that's usually not, that's not what you need from butter. Tzaddik ochel esov v'nafsho, v'betin rashoim techsar, v'chen hanoise isha. So too, one who marries a woman, yachshov l'shem shamayim, he should think in the name of heaven, she'ikayim pirei rivya, that in this way he'll be able to fulfill the mitzvah of being fruitful and multiply. V'yei lo zera oivdei Hashem, and he'll have progeny who serve God. Yisbarach v'yirei shamayim, who themselves are God-fearing, and not any of the other thoughts that a person might have in getting married. There might be, a role for some of those intentions as well, but primarily the point is, as he says here, or yachshov, or to think, she'imolle ta'avaso v'yichole gitzro b'ishto kedei shelo yis'ave l'noshim acheros, or a person can have in mind on a lower level, or a level of lower intention, that his various needs are being taken care of and fulfilled through his wife, together with his wife. And that will keep his mind, as far as those things are concerned, off other women. Or for example, be with his wife when he gets an indication that she's interested. So he might not be particularly interested at that time. Maybe for whatever reason he might be distracted or not quite thinking about it. But if he notices all of a sudden that she's showing him an interest, and he gets the inclination that she's interested in sharing time together, then he should then he should initiate that act in order to make her happy. In order to fulfill her needs. Or at least to have in mind, it's in order to strengthen his body, because there's a need, just physiologically, for a person to express that and be involved in it, and therefore a person might feel that either psychologically or emotionally or even physically, there's a need. And he's doing it not just to enjoy himself, but to take care of a bodily need. Because the expelling of semen from time to time is needed for a healthy body. And he means expelling it from the body in the permitted context, together with one's wife. But a person who is is overly active in this realm, many sicknesses can come upon the person, because his bodily life-giving flow becomes diminished, and his body becomes weak. Right? While that kind of energy is developing within him, he's got a lot of vigor. Once it's expelled, that vigor is diminished until it rises again. But a person who's constantly depleting it is going to be putting a constant burden on his body to keep restoring that vigor. A person who goes in this path, that he engages, for example, in intimacy with his wife, either for the intention of having children and raising them in Torah, or in order to cultivate a loving relationship with his wife, or if it's on a more physical plane, but he sees that she's interested, to make her happy, or even a more physical plane in order to maybe replenish his body, his vitality, then all of those intentions would be okay. But if it's just for the purpose of expressing, for enjoyment, and he stirs up that enjoyment just to have enjoyment, so he's constantly going to be depleting, and putting a burden on that part of his body. He serves God. So if he's engaged in this action with these intentions, or other actions, as we mentioned, with those intentions, all of his days will be spent serving God. And even when he's involved in business dealings, and even when he's involved in having intercourse, because in everything his thought is in order to fulfill his needs, and no more. Not his desires, but his needs. In order for his body to complete, in order to serve God. So in his business dealings, again, he's only going to be engaged in permitted dealings, and only to the extent which he's going to be able to fulfill his needs, but not to the extent where he's going to fulfill interests of his that go far beyond his needs, and which is going to distract him from the main thing, which is learning and doing mitzvos and good deeds and so forth and so on. And even when he's sleeping, and even when he sleeps, if a person sleeps with intention, not of like escaping from being awake, or not just because it's fun to sleep, but rather he sleeps with the explicit intention of replenishing his strength so that he can continue to serve Hashem. So even as he's sleeping, he's fulfilling a mitzvah. Because you certainly can't serve Hashem when you're sick, and therefore you need to avoid being run down, which means sleeping, which means that sleeping is also a form of serving Hashem. And with this in mind, the sleep itself becomes a service of Hashem. Not like another person who's sleeping just because he's tired. I'm sleeping so that I should have energy to serve Hashem. So then sleeping itself becomes a mitzvah. Turn page over to Nun. The sages said, all of your deeds should be in the name of heaven. And this is what King Solomon said in his wisdom. In all of your ways you shall know him, whether it's eating, or sleeping, or cohabitating, or drinking, or working, or whatever the case may be. In all of your ways you shall know him. And if you're careful to perform all of your needs in a way which is consistent with God, then then your paths will be made straight. Then your paths will be made straight. I once just had a thought here. B'kol drochecha do'ehu. Be starts with a base. Drochecha daled, do'ehu daled. Badad. Badad means alone. Sometimes a person has to kind of separate himself from society and be mitboded, to be alone in order to commune with God and contemplate and meditate on what he's doing, whether what he's doing is right or wrong, in the right measure, and so forth and so on. So, b'chol drochecha do'ehu, badad, only through being misboded, setting some time aside from time to time to think about, review, contemplate, have some type of a spiritual reckoning, can a person kind of think about the ways in which he's either serving or not serving Hashem through the different things that a person does throughout the day. This is very important. So a person who's eating just because he wants to have the food, because the food tastes good, he's not doing a mitzvah. If he eats because I'm now about to eat in order to be healthy so that I have energy to continue serving Hashem. And if it tastes good, that's an opportunity to thank Hashem for the fact that my fuel tastes good. Thank God, that my tank is filled with good tasting food and not foul tasting fuel. Right? Imagine that. If I had to drink petroleum. In this way, Hashem packages my petroleum in appealing red apples and luscious, sweet, honey-filled watermelon, and protein-rich meat and poultry, which also tastes good when it's roasted, when it's cooked, and in different types of ways, and fish, and all the variety of things that we have, little gifts that Hashem sends you, like lovers, He's not going to always send her chocolate. One day it's chocolate, another day it's a rose, another day it's a little envelope with a little, another day it's a picture, another day it's a trinket. So God sends us a little egg, an apple, an orange, all of these many, many different gifts that He sends us, especially gift wrapped for you. With variety, and it smells nice, and it looks nice, and it tastes good. What a wonderful thing. So I'm eating in order to replenish my energy to serve Hashem, and I'm thankful in the meantime that it's also tasty. But if I indulge in the taste and therefore eat more than I need, then that's kind of what's that?
It's not being gluttonous.
Yes. So then it becomes gluttonous. It defeats the purpose. The same thing. A person go to sleep. Well, I'm tired. I'm going to go to bed. Or I'm tired and I can't serve Hashem as it is. I'm going to go to sleep so that I can wake up as soon as necessary. But if the purpose is sleep for sleep's sake, so once you sleep 8 hours, alarm goes off, snooze button, boom, another hour, another 2 hours, another 3 hours. Why? Because he's just indulging in sleep for sleep's sake. That's no good. How much do you need? 6 hours? Sleep your 6 hours. Alarm rings. You get up. Of course you're going to be tired when you first wake up and groggy. But you force yourself out of bed, you wash your face, brush your teeth, got up, got out of bed, drag the comb across my head. Yeah, you brush your teeth, get up, go to shul. After a little while, you start to wake up, and before you know it, you're fine. And you'll generally have more energy throughout the day. But if you ever, I'm sure everybody's had this before, you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning. Boom, I'm up. But it's only 6. It's too early to get up. It's true I've slept 6 hours, but I'm used to sleeping later than 6 o'clock. And you feel like, yeah, but I'm awake, I'm alert, the birds are chirping, it's a nice day, why not? Nah. You have another 2 hours, you usually get up at 8 anyway, get up at 8. So you rely on your alarm clock, alarm at 8 o'clock. You wake up, you're so groggy. It's so hard to get out of bed. But 2 hours ago, you had 6, you were bright, fresh. If you had gotten up, you probably would have felt a lot better now than you do now after having slept another 2 hours more than you need to. Right? It happens all the time. You wake up after, for whatever reason, and you're really ready to start your day. It's just earlier than you need to. So you go back to sleep, and you end up feeling more tired when you slept later than you had when you first woke up. In any case, the whole point is, in order to spend all of our ways and all of our days trying to do things in a way which is consistent with Hashem's will. On page Nun, second paragraph, Yazov Adam kol avois v'gidbak ba'ava shebori bohu. However, all of these forms of love a person should be willing to let go in order to pursue his love for God. I kind of think what he's saying here is, even if there are negative ways of expressing love for things in this world and more positive ways of expressing love for things in this world, ultimately, even those positive things are a way of directing our love for things of this worldly of a nature towards God. But above that itself, but above that is love for God itself. V'ahavas Hashem Baruch Hu, hitachlis kol hatuchunos. The love of God is the purpose of everything. V'sof kol amalos medregos kol anshe avoda, and it is the goal which is set in the sight of all people who are interested in serving Hashem. V'nidvos hanefashos me'anshe chesed v'anevim v'aprushim hi sofan ve'in lamalo himena. And this is the goal that is set by all of the righteous, pious prophets and those who are separating themselves from this worldly of a lifestyle. It's all for the purpose of getting to a love of God. And very often we find that fear for God is given precedence over the love of Hashem. You, Israel, what does God demand of you except fear for Him? And to love Him. So we find here that, for example, the fear of God comes before loving God. Since love is the purpose for separating oneself from this worldly type of indulgences, but a person can't attain this until he first attains a level of fear for God. He's addressing a problem here. If the love of Hashem is the purpose of everything, so why do we find that the fear of God in our sources very often precedes that of love of God, implying that that's more important? So the author here answers that that's not the case. If we find that the fear of God precedes love of God, it's not because it's more important, but rather because it is a venue through which one attains love of God. So the first step is a fear of God and then a love of God. If you're on such a high level of love of God, that's a wonderful thing, right? But most people, you yourself, have to go through a period of fear of God. And why is this? Because a person who loves, let's say, another person, and the same thing applies for loving God, without having any fear for that person, even though the love will dictate a certain devotion towards that person, but if that devotion is contradicted in any way, a person is very often liable, even if it's only temporarily, to betray that love in order to do something else. Right. One second, and there's no real safeguard to do otherwise. So you find, for example, a person might love another person, and that love will dictate a certain loyalty, will result in a certain loyalty to that person. But if that love is challenged initially, or if it's distracted in any way, or deflected in any way, so the person might actually justify, I love ultimately that person more than anything, and that person loves me. And even if temporarily I go astray, that love will help conquer and overcome any friction that results from, let's say, from my having gone astray. And a person might justify doing things which would betray that love in the name of the love, which is wrong. In truth, what's that? That can happen. That can happen. So therefore, it's very important, initially, for a person to recognize that there also has to be an element of fear, which certainly on a higher level means awe of God. But even on a lower level, it means simply the fear of, the ramifications of abrogating or doing anything to compromise that love. So in our case, for example, a person might become embroiled with desire to do something. And very often the love that he has for God will not be enough to prevent him from doing that. That's the reality of it. But a thought of, wow, if I do that, then the ramifications are this, that, and the other, that's more likely to stop him.
I think for me personally, I'm not saying everyone, I'm more fearful of upsetting Hashem than what the punishment's going to be. So if I do something I deem's wrong, I'm more fearful of thinking I'm going to upset him.
Right.
Rather than give Hashem
right.
That's ultimately what I want to do.
Yeah, that's nice. And I was going to say, if there is a higher level of fear for God, it's the fear of losing that love. So there, it's not so much the fear of punishment; it's the fear of doing anything that would actually compromise this relationship.
Love for me,
Yeah. So that's called yira ilo'ah. That's called a higher form of love, as opposed to yira tota. But that being said, still, there's a progress. There's like a procession. There's a certain kind of procession of the way things work. And first it has to go with the recognition that God exists. And it has to come with the fact that God has expectations. And a person who doesn't live with the expectations, there is retribution. Within that framework, ensuring loyalty to God, a person can then develop a love for God. But the fidelity initially is not coming from love of God. Because if that love is challenged in any way, the fidelity will be compromised. Fidelity has to come from a sincere and true recognition that God exists and God knows and God cares, and if I'm doing something wrong, there is going to be repercussions for this. Upon that, a person can start to build a proactive love of God for everything that God does, and so forth and so on. Above that will be the love that you're referring to, which is called the yira ilo'ah, which is an awe of God and a fear of doing anything to lose that relationship. Umay ha'ava, What is this love of God? The true purpose of everything. It is the extension and the inclination of the soul of itself to God in order to cleave to His supernal light. This is the love of God. The love of God is some internal drive which compels the soul to want to cleave to the divine light. HaNefesh Azot hi makor hadas. And this soul, this is the source for knowledge. V'hi tohera v'zaka. And it is pure and clean. V'bore koishra b'guf. And the Creator ties this soul to the body. Asher cheshko rav linososa imi telech b'darkei Hashem. God connects the soul to the body, whose desires are many, and all of this is to see whether the soul will go in the ways of God. And since a person is enclosed with the body, meaning the person is not the body is not the person. The person, which is the soul, that's the das, that person is enclosed with the body. The body is not oneself. Oneself is enclosed with the body. Hanivra beruach behamus, and this body was built, was created with more of an animal spirit. Ein koach beneshama hanivres me'elokim lachshav achar boro. The virtue of this body, being an animal, physical body, hinders the soul from thinking about its creator. Ki me'orevesi b'tavas haguf, because the soul is intertwined with the desires of the body. V'kol yimei katnus, and through all of the years of one's youth, if a person is really only asking for and interested in filling his desires and his pleasures. Kimirov tavas aguf, because of the inclination of the body, eating and drinking and pleasures of this world, which is a passing and fleeting world. Or he thinks about gaining great wealth. In such a person, the soul doesn't have an opportunity to really think about God. Because its soul itself is ensnared in cords of worthlessness. But when the soul feels what benefit it derives without being immersed in things having to do with the body, the soul will want and to request respite from the desires of the body. Just like a sick person desires a doctor. Bring me a doctor, I need help. So the soul is like crying out for God. And when the soul becomes cured from the sickness, then the soul itself will have an internal light and also will have its own source of strength. So it's very important then. Children, even though they're adorable, we love them, but spiritually speaking, their souls are so intertwined with their bodies, it's so inextricably bound one with the other, that by and large, children are really only interested in getting and having their needs fulfilled. They want food, they want drink, they want toys, they want fun, they want sleep. They make a mess, they expect you to clean, with no intention whatsoever of cleaning up after themselves. So all they do is use the world and mess it up and expect other people to pay the bill. And even as parents, in many ways we're childlike until we pass on and become more spiritual and parent with a capital P, parent-like. Every person is at a stage of his development. But in any case, that's the point. From bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah, the soul starts to get a fighting chance. And at that point, a person can start to consider that he or she is more than just his or her body. He or she is some driving force within, which compels a person to take responsibility and not just to consume on other people's expense. Those are the mitzvos. Those are the mitzvos. Once a person starts to taste or to experience the liberating effect of the soul's expressing this kind of independence from the body, then that stirs up a desire for more. That desire is love of God. That's desire that comes. It's that desire which we're referring to as the love of God. Until then, a person just loves himself. That's all they want, to have their needs satisfied, even if it makes a mess, and it all is at other people's expense. And that's why God makes them so adorable, because otherwise, why would you suffer that behavior from anybody, right? But since they're so adorable and cute and sweet and everything else, and they're ki'ilu yours, so you're willing to put up with all of that nonsense. From what adult would you tolerate that? You wouldn't. And the proof is that once they become adults, you don't tolerate from your kids anymore. You expect more of them. But it's better for you and for them to train them about this, right? Gradually over time, and not all of a sudden, all at once. You're a man now. The rules of the game have changed. That's tough. You haven't given them any warning. You haven't given them any transition. That's too much to demand of. So it's part of raising children properly, is getting them ready for this stage. In any case, that's the love we're talking about. We're talking about the innate driving force within a person, that's his soul, to cleave to God. And that drive, that desire, that love is occluded by a person's love for himself. Only after he starts to get out of himself is he able to start thinking about loving God. V'ketzad hi ha'ava sheyehav es Hashem ava gedola v'yasera raba meod. How is this form of love that he should love God, which should be great, without any limit? Ad shetiyeh nafsho keshura ba'avas Hashem yisbarach, until his soul is enveloped with the love of God. V'nefesh halo meleh ava, and a soul which is full of love, v'oiso ava keshura b'simcha, that love is then going to spill over, it's connected to joy and happiness. V'oiso simcha mavrachas me'al levavo ne'imus aguf v'tanu genefesh. That happiness then will cause there to hover and dwell upon this person's heart the pleasantness of body and the pleasure of the soul. And this intense joy which increases in his heart. It's like nothing compared to the intensity of love of God. All of the love that a person can think about stirring up for his children is like nothing compared to a heart which learns to desire and to love God, which in a way is also healthy, because children who realize that the parents love them but they love Hashem even more will prevent them from becoming spoiled and will also enable them to love Hashem themselves.
Raising your children the right way.
Yeah. And it also liberates a parent from being overly doting on his children. Because if his children are the single most intense love in his life, so he'll do everything for them. And they become primary in his life, and they also feel primary in their lives.
All love should be secondary to love your Hashem.
But if they recognize that even the love for your children is secondary to the love for Hashem,
teaches them how special
yes,
Hashem.
ultimately it's going to be more healthy for them.
And
This goes and therefore all of his thoughts will only be directed towards how he can fulfill the will of God and to do things which will be a way of sanctifying God's name and to turn himself over to the love of God. Now, of course, theoretically, a person could become so consumed with love of God that he ends up harming himself and others because he becomes totally detached. and that would be obviously an undesirable extreme. And this is compared to the analogy of a moth whose attraction to the flame causes it to gyrate closer and closer and closer until ultimately it becomes consumed in the very object of its love. And that would, of course, be taking things too far. If a person becomes overly consumed in the love of God, then he neglects his own needs and the needs of his wife and his children, and he might decide not even to have a family. That would all be unacceptable. But still, at least the point is to love God so much so that that's his main focus in life, and everything else is secondary to that. Not that he neglects it, but it's secondary. This is the mention. This is the love of God that's mentioned in the Torah. Like Pinchas, for example, who sacrificed his life. We'll be seeing this in an upcoming parsha soon, for the purpose of sanctifying God's name. The Avram Avinu, Shomar, and also Abraham, who says, "Harimoisi yodi el Hashem kel elyon." I will raise my hands to God on high. Konei shamayim v'aretz. Im michut v'ad sroch nal. If I take even like a shoelace as reward for this battle that I fought. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that everything he did was all for God and not for any bounty or personal aggrandizement. Ve'elisha shelorotzo lekachas me Naaman, and also another example of this would be Elisha, who didn't want to take from Naaman. A person has to be very careful not to negate and nullify his Torah study because of the pleasure of messing around and having fun and playing with the kids. If he has to take time away from learning in order to pay attention to his children for his children's sake, that's one thing. But if his children don't need it, he's just doing it in order to get pleasure and benefit out of it, so that would be wrong. Unless, of course, he needs time away from learning. He feels that showing them love will not only be good for them, perhaps they don't need it right now, but maybe he feels that he needs to do something to catalyze a connection with his children so that he can cultivate his relationship with them, so it would be better for them, ultimately, and better for him too.
You could do both at the same time. Like you could teach your children Torah and show love to them that way, and that way you're teaching them about Hashem and you.
Yeah, you can do that, although, of course, learning Torah with the children is not going to be on the same level as you should be learning.
I mean, at an intermediary level.
And also, often kids don't want to learn. And they might not need to. They might need for you to sit down with them and play hide and seek, or play with plastic farm animals, or, whatever.
Yeah, they can play with the children's Torah books enough,
The last sentence here in this paragraph we break. V'chibas ria v'dibur v'gam yazov tiyulim. The love of seeing things and speaking about things, and with the need to go taking trips and all of the time. V'yanim zemirois kedei lemolois levavois simcha b'havas Hashem baruch hu. Rather, he should sing the songs of Hashem, perhaps the Tehillim of David HaMelech, rather than going out and seeing the world. If there's something that has to be done, or a person needs a break, that's one thing. But just to go out, just to get out, just to see the world, that's foreign to us. If it's necessary for one's health or to benefit a person's service of Hashem in one way or the other, that's one thing. But if it's just because other people are doing it, even though he doesn't need to, so he shouldn't do it. And I admire very much sometimes beginners come through here, they make the decision that they don't want to go on the trips. The yeshiva offers trips in order to take care of a need. But if a person doesn't have that need, sometimes people stay back and they don't go on the trips. I'm not discouraging one from going on the trips, but I am saying to somebody who doesn't need them, encouraging them not to go if you don't need to. All right, let's stop here and let you guys get ready for the next class.